Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. Today, we're talking about why mindfulness is important. And I want to share a little story with you because originally, when the word mindfulness got really popular, I kind of had, negative thoughts. Is that the best way to put it? Which is so not mindful, right? Like, I felt like, oh, we're just pushing. You know what it is? Actually, I take that all that back and I should just start re-recording this, but I'm not going to. This is, you guys are getting like active look at my brain right now. It's not the term mindfulness. I have had a really tough time with how quote unquote self-care is being promoted on social media these days. And I that's coming at me from like a very personal reflective lens because I would watch these videos, these like, this is the day in my life. And this girl like spends 3.5 hours in the morning setting her day. And then, for me, I'm like, well, frick, I don't even have an alarm. My children are my alarm. And it's just like, bam, starting in the morning. And I always had this really like icky view about how self-care was being shown to us. And it took me a while to separate that immature thinking of like, just because I don't have 3.5 hours in the morning does not mean I don't do anything for myself. And how mindfulness worked into that. And so if you were in boot camp, in the last boot camp, and if you weren't and you want to join our next one, which will be in September, you can head to ttc.kelseyduncan.com/bootcamp, put your name on the wait list there. You don't want to miss out. But you'll have heard me share this story about how when we added more mindset support to Fertility Confidence Method, which is how we support couples making babies, we doubled our pregnancy rate in that first year. And every time we add more emphasis on how important your mindset is in this journey, the increase in pregnancies that we have, the less miscarriages that we have, and the quicker time to pregnancy that we have, which I always find really, really fascinating. And as someone who's a very research driven, like physical based practitioner, when we think we're not getting pregnant, what's our first immediate thought? Our first immediate thought is what's wrong with my body, right? Which is not a thought we should be having. So we're going to just skirt over that, right? If you're in that thought process of my body is broken, something's wrong with my body, this is where mindfulness comes into play, because these are not the thoughts that are going to serve us in terms of finding the answers and solutions and creating an optimized environment for your baby, for your body to get pregnant and to carry that pregnancy. And yes, the physical body is important. Yes, we need to work on egg quality. Yes, we need to make sure that you're making enough progesterone and estrogen and your thyroid is optimized and you aren't insulin resistant and you're not full of inflammation. And we also need to make sure that your partner is making good, healthy sperm with a low DNA frag rate and a good amount of testosterone and all the things. That's all very important. But there's this other aspect. There's this mindfulness component. There's this mental emotional aspect that I think does get talked about in the fertility world, but it's almost like there's these two extremes. You either see the coach or the practitioner who believes that that's all that matters, that we are simply going to manifest our baby and nothing else matters. And then we have the other side where it's a 0%, piece of the puzzle. They don't talk about it at all. And my belief is that we are somewhere in the middle of that, where the two aspects really do marry together and we can't ignore either side. We have to find this elusive balance, right? We never have balance in anything, but we have to find this balance of both. So when I say mindfulness, what is mindfulness? Well, I asked ChatGPT what mindfulness was because I was curious, like, how do we actually define that word? And I liked how it broke it down and said, mindfulness is the practice of intentionally bringing your intention to the present moment with an attitude of openness, curiosity, and non-judgmental. And I think that that piece is really important and involves awareness of your thoughts, your feelings, the bodily sensations you're having, the surroundings that you're in, actually being present and aware of not just what's going on around you, but what's going on inside of you as well. And we can talk a lot about that aspect of the fertility journey, because so many of you will just go numb in order to not feel the grief, the sadness, the anger, the depression, the anxiety. So instead of flipping that over to joy and optimism and happiness, we're just going numb. And that's also not a state of awareness that we necessarily want to be in. We want to have acceptance of the experiences that we're having. We don't need to avoid or judge or change them. And that's another challenging aspect on the fertility journey. How do we accept this part of our experience? It's not fair, right? That is a belief that I think is valid to have. And we have to hold the duality of that, of like, what are we supposed to learn in this moment as well? And then the presence in the here and now, whether regardless of or not regardless, the presence of here and now, rather than living in the past or necessarily living in the future. So again, really coming back to that awareness of self and of your surroundings and of your thoughts and feelings, and how your thoughts and feelings create your results, and how important and impactful that actually can be. And so when we hear mindfulness, we often, and I say we, but I will actually say myself included, when I first started on this journey, was I heard the word mindfulness, and what did I immediately think? Meditation, right? I thought, and journaling. Those were the two things that I was like, if I were to equate like me having a mindfulness practice, it was like, well, I'm going to meditate and journal. But I think there's also something to be said about this not just being, and this is something a lot of you need to hear, especially my clients. So if you're listening, this is for you as well, that mindfulness does not just become another checkbox on your long to-do list. And it can often start to feel that way. And it's just something you're doing because you were told you need to do it in order to get pregnant. But are you actually practicing awareness and acceptance and presence in the here and now? And I think a lot of us can probably be really radically honest with ourselves that we're not. And I'm not just speaking to you, I'm speaking to me too. I'm actually, maybe this is where this episode is coming from, because I'm actually working with my mentor right now in a 4-week container, really focused in on bringing in my empowered feminine, and I'm exploring this aspect of like going deeper in my mindfulness journey, and really working through some of those limiting beliefs of like what I thought this was, and how I went about it in a very robotic to-do list type of way, but I wasn't actually changing my belief system. I was just doing the exercise because someone told me to do it. And that's a huge discrepancy in how this practice works, but especially from a fertility perspective. So I can hear you when you say, but Kelsey, like, why? Why does this matter? Truly, truly, why does this matter? And you guys know me by now, know that I'm going to pull some of the data for you, right? So I have some research studies here, and I will link some of these links in the show notes if you're curious about actually reading through the paper about why this matters, because I can share with you our results in fertility confidence method and what that looks like and how important that I have seen that been. But does that also translate from a research perspective? And the answer is yes. And these are the things that they find in the studies when it comes to fertility, and for men and women, right? Like, this isn't just a female aspect of the journey. I would say, unfortunately, the mental emotional support and the mindfulness aspect of the male fertility journey is severely lacking. Like the emotional and mental support, and even physical support, but definitely the mental emotional support for men going through this fertility journey, like this is still something not talked about at all ever. And how many of you have gone into a fertility clinic and your husband's been asked like 3 questions and that's it? And then they're like, okay, cool, you're good to go. But no one's actually asking them, well, how are you feeling in this moment? How are you handling this? How are you holding this? How are you supporting your wife, but also, or partner, but also how are you supporting yourself? How are you nourishing yourself? There's like that rabbit hole just opened, right? We all just saw that big cratery hole open that we could go down. So know that I'm acknowledging that, and that this is for both of you, not just for one or the other. So one of the pieces that we see in the literature is that obviously working on mindfulness through your fertility journey can reduce stress, anxiety, and depression. So they use, oh my gosh, what's the word? I don't know why I want to say codes, because that's so not it. They use, charts is not the word either, Kelsey. Oh my goodness. Like scales, that's better. They use, if you guys are watching on YouTube, you're watching me struggle through this, but I'm not going to cut this out because again, this is just part of my brain. They use scales, they use questionnaires and scaling systems, like rating, like a 0 to 5, you do it at the beginning and you do it at the end and you rate and we see how it changes. So they use these scales and they find that mindfulness-based interventions significantly decrease depression and anxiety in both men and women. And yes, they didn't necessarily, in this study specifically, go on to be like, okay, and then how many of them got pregnant, which is obviously, that's the research we really want to see. But they did say that these women rated their overall quality of life higher after the mindfulness-based interventions. And how many of you can sit there and honestly say like, oh my God, I want that, right? When we're in the thick of our fertility journey, our quality of life it can suffer if we're not being mindful of how do we not let that happen. With men, they actually do find similar things, that higher mindfulness usage through the fertility journey has a better rating of quality of life. They often seek more social support, which we just talked about is like not really on the market at all, and reducing stress. Like those are really big pieces, because I think we can all agree that stress, depression, and anxiety are very high in the infertility community. And we can't out supplement those things. I can't just say like, we'll take these nice nourishing, calming herbs or mood boosting things. Like that's not the answer here. The answer is actually getting the support that your brain and your nervous system needs to feel safe in this moment, to feel joy and optimism with the other hosts of emotions, to manage your stress properly, to react and respond differently to situations so that you open up this possibility for pregnancy. There's a lot more research done, obviously, in couples doing IVF, because it's a controlled environment, right? It's a controlled environment. They can say, okay, you are going to start IVF and you are also going to start this X amount of time program with the mindfulness coordinator, and then you're going to fill out this questionnaire. So a lot of the research is done in IVF, which I think is good, cool, and we can still extrapolate that data. I don't feel any type of way about that. So this study in particular looked at an 8-week mindfulness-based intervention for women specifically. They were undergoing their first cycle of IVF, which I also thought was really cool. And they had better emotional regulation, self-compassion, and enhanced fertility-specific quality of life, which essentially means they felt like they could go through their IVF cycle feeling better about the journey, feeling less scared and nervous, less worried, less fearful, still felt like they actually had the mental capacity to take care of themselves outside of the fertility clinic. And I think that's so, so huge in terms of success. So when clients come to me and they work with us inside Fertility Confidence Method, and they're either coming to us starting their fertility journey with IVF already, or maybe they've been with us for a while and we're now transitioning into an IVF experience, they always ask, okay, now that I'm doing IVF, what do I have to do? What changes? What are we doing here? And I always have to remind them that, listen, everything we're teaching you, everything we've already tweaked, every stone we've unturned, that hasn't been instead of the IVF journey. It has been preparing you for this if you need it. And so there isn't anything different. We're not all of a sudden eating different or exercising different because we're doing IVF. We might make some supplement changes depending on what you're doing so that we're safely mixing with medication, obviously. But for the most part, like all of that stays the same. But what likely needs to change is that you are now spending more time on this aspect, on the mental health and the mindfulness aspect, because you typically by that point have the physical body piece dialed in, right? And we're avoiding working on the mess that is our brain. And that now becomes 10x more important, likely, in this experience. So that's usually, especially after transfers, especially after frozen embryo or even fresh, but either or transfers, women will say to me, okay, like now what do I do? And I'm like, there's nothing else we can do physically at this point. Now it becomes about the mental game and the strength that you have, and working through that and using our affirmations and using your mindset toolkit and doing the things that you need to do to believe in this being a possibility for you. They also found that through the process of mindfulness-based work with women going through their fertility experience specifically, that they had, and this program, I don't think it shared how long they did this with. I'd have to open it up again. I didn't make any notes on that, but they found that they had more self-acceptance, more compassion. They felt strength in like asking questions and standing up for themselves. And again, I think that is such a huge thing that we need to be able to do through the fertility experience. And then the last one here for women specifically was actually, I wanted to include this because it was based on an app specifically, which I love to see. We've seen a lot of cool studies over the years showing virtual. I always love looking at like virtual care, virtual mental health care, virtual communities, because that's what I do, right? That's what Fertility Confidence Method is. And every single year we're seeing data coming out showing that being a part of a community, whether it's in person or virtual, of having a coach that you can go and ask questions, whether it's virtual or in person, actually improves rates of fertility success and quality of life through the process, which is fuel for me to say, like, I am contributing positively to this situation. So this app used IVF focused mindfulness. So it was specifically for women doing IVF. And it was built out as a mindfulness journey while they went through their IVF process. And they rated lower levels of depression, anxiety, stress, increased self-efficacy. I think that's really fascinating. Again, something in terms of like that self-acceptance, that strength, that asking questions, feeling confident. Like that's kind of how I interpret that. And these were all done, like I said, in women who were starting IVF. And that can be a very challenging process to go through and say, I feel comfortable and confident, which is obviously our whole shtick, right? Fertility Confidence Method. My entire purpose here is to make you feel confident on your fertility journey, whether you're just starting out or you're 4 years down the line, whether you're doing it at home or you're doing it in the clinic. It doesn't matter to me. I just want you to feel confident in terms of where you are at and not feel like you're continuously swimming through this sea of misinformation on the internet. And then in men, kind of basically, the same thing. We know with men going through the fertility journey, we see higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, similar with women. And we also see higher levels of erectile dysfunction and performance issues. It can become very challenging. This is a common question we get asked in FCM and that we coach on and we share resources on. And you're not alone. Obviously, if this is a dynamic in your intimacy relationship, unfortunately, I highly recommend checking out episode 139 with Vanessa and Xander Marin. Vanessa wrote a book called Sex Talks. They have an amazing Instagram account at Vanessa and Xander, and I'll link that in the show notes. But the episode was a really good conversation because I feel like Xander actually really took over in a good way, in a positive way, in the middle, because I had a lot of male specific questions, and he was able to give his sort of dynamic and piece from a male point of view. And then Vanessa was able to use obviously her sex therapy education to also walk us through some of those aspects in terms of navigating intimacy challenges inside the fertility journey as well. And I think the mindfulness piece comes into play here and plays a really, really big role. And like I said, we often don't talk about how this impacts the male side of things. And my belief is that it actually impacts it likely the same, if not more, but we don't see it as much because men are so quick to lock that down, right? For many reasons, ego being one of them. The second being that they don't want to add to your plate of worry, that they're worried. So they're just going to be cool, calm, collected cucumbers. And that's not necessarily what's going on underneath. And then that is manifesting as physical issues down the line. So there's a whole lot we could definitely unpack there. But I think the biggest piece to remember is that when we're utilizing mindfulness appropriately, and what I mean when I say appropriately is that we're not just checking the box off every day saying, yep, I did my 5 minutes of meditating, I'm a good girl, I did the thing, but we're actually imploring a sense of better awareness and understanding and kindness and compassion for ourselves, and exploring areas where we maybe need to make changes to our belief systems and work on reprogramming some negative thoughts that we have on and on and on and on in our brains, right? That's really what mindfulness is coming in here to do, to give you more emotional regulation and resilience, promoting that present moment awareness and removing you from that constant state of rumination to give you better relationship dynamics between the two of you. I think the one thing we can all agree on is that, the fertility journey is hard on a relationship. And then when we're adding just more and more and more stress and mental health issues on top of maybe some lack of communication, that like there's a bit of a bomb that can go off there. And we obviously don't want that. We want our clients to come out of their fertility experience with a baby and with a 10x stronger relationship as well. And then reducing stress, we could talk about how this now has a trickle down effect to the physical body, because cortisol, our stress hormone, it's impacting your insulin, your thyroid, your estrogen, your progesterone, your testosterone, all of these things that we know because we read about it on the internet, how crucial it is for fertility and infertility. And if we're not actually trying to manage and mitigate, again, no amount of supplements is going to pull us out of that kind of pit, right? That we've dug ourselves. So hopefully this helps you to understand a little bit more about the why it's important. And in terms of like, well, where do we go from here? I obviously think finding yourself a community and a leader and programming is going to be helpful, which is what we include inside Fertility Confidence Method. It's a part of our plan building. It's constantly a part of our strategy. And it really does make a big, big difference. And when women get pregnant in our program and they fill out a little form for us to give us like all the deets on, and basically tell us like, yay, it worked. And we have them rate, how much do you feel mindfulness played a role in your fertility experience? And we have them rated out of 5, I believe. Maybe it's 10, but it doesn't matter. And I would say average of since we started this, which was only at the beginning of this year, we're probably seeing a lot of 4 out of 5s. So a lot of high rate of people being like, yeah, this definitely played a role, or this made a difference for me since joining FCM, and look at me now. And so that's only, again, fuel for us to keep on keeping on. The other resource I have for you guys that I think would be a great next step, if you're like, I hear you, and my partner and I both really need some aspect of working through this, is actually our Conceive Together challenge. It's not fully mindfulness focused. There's lots of physical aspects in there as well. We go through like a different training each day. For each of you, I share the research of how this impacts women and men, and then what is your homework for that day. And also there's a connection challenge each day to get you guys talking about these things and communicating in a different way. And we do talk about stress management in the CT challenge, but I think it would be a really wonderful tool if your partner, especially if you're female listening to this and your partner's been a little bit skeptical of like getting help or getting support or what this looks like. The CT challenge, it's $9 and you have access to it. Once you buy, it's yours to keep. You can go through it as many times as you like. Is a really great resource to get him involved. It's actually a private podcast feed, so it's super accessible. Get to know me a little bit better, get actionable strategies and tools. You're going to start building out the next phase of your care plan. And then obviously, if you want more, you need more support, you know where to find me. And you can schedule a clarity call over at downloads.kelseyduncan.com/results. And all of those links will be in the show notes for you. Hopefully this was helpful. I think this is a really important conversation. I think we could probably spend hours and hours talking about this. And this might be one that you want to listen to again or share with a friend or family member who is also in the thick of their fertility journey that needs to hear how important this aspect can be. My hope is that everyone feels confident on their fertility journey moving forward, and I will see you guys in the next episode.